Welcome to Threadhead TV. Today's edition we will be taking a dress and turning it into a vest, and another dress and turning it into a jacket. So this was a dress that I found at the Gap outlet. It's not a Gap label, but it was like an originally $150 dress or something like that I got for $20. And I couldn't resist because I love the details, but hello, I am not a size 4. I thought if I got it home and tried it on and I didn't like how it fit, I would turn it into something else. So here is my something else. Folding the dress in half, I found the exact midpoint at the hem. And from there, I could make a straight line with my ruler and rotary cutter up to the center of the bodice. And then I used my seam ripper to cut up the middle of the bodice. The suede pants were a $5 purchase from Goodwill. The back pockets were falling off, but a lot of the suede was still in really nice condition, so it was the perfect piece of clothing to cut up and use for this project. I also liked that it was washable suede. Important to use a rotary cutter and ruler to get your measurements precise. This will give you a professional finish. My pant panels are not as long as my dress, so I'm going to have to piece the suede together. I went for a width as wide as I could possibly get it. I think mine ended up being 5.5 inches wide. If you've never sewn with suede on your sewing machine before, I would recommend using a scrap piece of suede to test before you sew into your panels. After sewing my panels together, I top stitched on either side of my seam. By testing, I realized that it's easier to sew with the suede layer on the bottom. You'll notice that the suede layer is sticking out from the skirt layer about a half an inch beyond the skirt layer. And instead of trying to explain what I was thinking, let me just say that here I had to go back and fix it so that it was one straight continuous seam down the front. Not shown here, but I did cut away the extra seam allowance to reduce bulk in the seams. Now that the suede panel is attached to the front of the dress, we need to finish it off. If you've watched my baby burp cloth tutorial, this is the same exact idea. We are basically encasing the seam. So the suede panel will be folded back just enough to cover the seam line that we just sewed. I have set my stitch length up to 4, which is normally around a 2.5, but it's going to be a longer stitch length at 4. And I have the wrong side of the dress facing up just to start with because I want to secure my tassel. And I feel I can be more precise around the neckline with the wrong side facing up. It's definitely a little bit trickier sewing because you cannot use pins and you just have to hold it. Now that the neckline is sewn, I'm starting at the bottom of the dress and I'm top stitching so the right side is facing up, and I'm looking underneath frequently as I'm sewing to make sure that everything is lining up just right. This is a vest that can be styled for summer, spring, fall, or winter, depending on how you layer it. So I am really liking this longer vest trend, and you can do this with an easier fabric, so you don't have to use suede, which is a little bit harder to work with. It's certainly worth the extra effort. There you have transformation number 1. We are on to number 2. Oh, cool dress, but kind of shapeless on me. So I don't like that I have an undefined waistline. That is not good for my shape. This dress was fully lined, and so the lining needed to be attached to the dress before cutting. So what I'm doing is making a line so I know the exact center point, and that's going to be my cutting line. And then I'm pinning so that I'm sewing about 1/4 inch away from that center line on both sides before I cut. And this finishes off the edges, and it also attaches the lining to the outer dress. My leather coat was purchased from eBay for about $20. So this is a great use of a coat that is a little bit worn around the sleeves or the neckline, but it still has leather that is in great condition. And I will use this coat for several other projects, so stay tuned to Threadhead TV for more great leather DIYs. You can't use pins on leather, so you have to get creative. Suede is a little more forgiving than leather, so I did do a little bit of seam ripping and fixing on my suede project that I couldn't show you. But here, really, leather is unforgiving, and so you can't pin and you can't really seam rip, so you got to get it right. So take a scrap and practice before you do your actual sewing. Here I put the leather on the top because I did this project first, and this is where I learned that actually it's much more stable if you put the leather on the bottom layer and the dress on the top. I will trim the leather away from the seam so that I have about a 1/4 inch of leather left there. And this is to reduce bulk on the inside. I'm top stitching with a stitch length of 4, which is a longer stitch length. I have my garment facing right side up, and I'm checking underneath frequently to make sure that my leather is being caught underneath by the stitching on the back side as well. And here's what the wrong side looks like. My sleeves were too short for a jacket, so I'm ripping out the seam and I'm going to add an additional leather cuff. I'm basically following the same steps that I followed to finish off the front of my jacket. If you have any questions about these projects, leave them in the comments section below and I'm happy to help. This looks like a jacket that is screaming for a ruffled shirt underneath, don't you think? This is Jude Bell with Threadhead TV. Thanks for joining me. Come on back for more great projects.